Hello and welcome to HACEMOS Latino Talks. Today we kick off Hispanic Heritage Month. I'm very excited to have this opportunity to represent HACEMOS as well as AT&T and also the organization that I work for, External and Legislative Affairs. And that's why I am very passionate about this topic. As it comes to the digital divide, is something that is very near and dear to my heart, and it's a top priority of AT&T. We have been working very hard to ensure that we invest in our infrastructure where our communities need it most, and that's what this conversation is all about. Is about understanding the work that is being done, not only from the AT&T side, but also from the, from the legislators' view, as well as the nonprofit view. We have amazing guests today. A good and dear friend of mine, Rosa Mendoza from Allvanza. She is the founder and CEO of the organization. She's an amazing Latina that works tirelessly to ensure that this homework gap, as has been known to be called, is addressed. So with her, she'll be joined by Representative Martinez from Oklahoma, and together they're going to have an amazing conversation. And that's it. That's all it is. Enjoy the conversation. Please reach out to us if you have any questions. Otherwise, feel free to share this far and wide, as it is a conversation worth having, even around the table at home. Best of luck. You talked about your abuela and the trust issues, and I said he hit it right on the head, right? Like, I hear my parents say exactly the same thing and say, I don't trust myself. It's not, it's yes. All of a sudden it's like this space that they're afraid to make a move, because when they make a move and they make the wrong move, I know that I'm guilty of, why didn't you read the fine print, or why didn't you do this, or why didn't you do that? Sure. The digital literacy component of this adoption, this general adoption, is very difficult and is very challenging. And I was telling Rosa the important role that organizations like her organization, the organizations that are in the community and that, have a trusted relationship with that community, so that they can educate and be that educator, right, as far as the literacy piece is concerned. So I would love to, and I know that this is like off the cuff question, but how important do you feel that is from you coming from the government side of things? How important is it, that partnership with those nonprofits at the local level to do the outreach to the community, sir?
Yeah, I mean, I think that those partnerships are so important. I mean, for example, you kind of go back to this trust component of, so I think about kids, right? If you're in school, you're getting to learn about computers and you're working on a computer and all that, but that doesn't mean mom and dad are getting that opportunity. So when the kid goes home and mom and dad are still like, yeah, we don't really have a computer, we don't really like to use it, they're a little leery of it. I do think there's a really neat opportunity that to maybe have mom and dad have the opportunity to come to school and learn about some literacy on computers and things like that, to help them along with kind of the programs that are being used for kids and their education. But also, I mean, I think these partnerships with nonprofit organizations, I mean, a lot of people in communities, they already trust people from those nonprofits because, it's people that they know, people that they've worked with in other ways, instead of having somebody that's kind of an outsider, somebody they don't really know coming in to try to teach them about something that could be a little complicated at times, let's face it. I mean, obviously, here I am, all through school, I've used the computer and I'm still struggling to figure it all out, right? So I think a lot of that is the trust component, but also remembering that, a lot of times the kids are getting it in school, but mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, whoever is raising those kids doesn't get that opportunity. So there's not only a racial divide and an opportunity there, but you get this generational divide where you're almost like speaking a different language, conducting business in a different way. And I think that's part of the divide that you see sometimes generationally is we've kind of forgot how to communicate with each other even because the younger generation relies so much on doing it, via text or chat or who knows what the latest app is that kids are on. I always tease people when I talk like, oh yeah, are you send me something on tweet me. I'm like, I'm still on MySpace, man. I'm just figuring that out. So but it's always something, right? So like the younger generation is really wrapped up in communicating that way, where maybe some older people are like, no, come visit me at my house, right? Come talk to me to my face. In the pandemic world, that's created different challenges as well. So it's hard to build a community when you can't be around each other. So
absolutely. Thank you, Rep. Martinez. And my apologies and our apologies for all the technical issues. I was telling Celeste that we would have a technical issue during a conversation about the digital divide,
sure.
Right?
Yeah.
It would happen.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
do have a relationship with technology because technology, this is typical. This is nothing new. This is what happens. But you know what? We are lucky enough that we actually have it and we're able to do this and we're able to have these conversations online without having to leave our home, right? So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the digital divide. We are talking about the need for people, for everyone to have access, even if we have technical issues, right? The important thing is that we are able to have this access that is very, very powerful. And our kids needed to do their homework and, people needed to apply for a job, you name it. We need it for every single thing you can think of, right? And technology is becoming more and more invasive in our lives. And you can see that it's a positive or a negative thing. It really doesn't matter how you view it, but that's the reality. So that's why this subject is very, very important. But, when we were having the technical issues, I was actually changing gears a little bit. And I was going to ask you, since you mentioned the census data, and I think I'll repeat the question because I think it was during that time that your connection was cut off. So the census numbers recently obviously came out, and they underscored how influential the Latino community has become due to our numbers. What more do Latinos need to learn and do to wield that power that our numbers say we have, Representative Martinez?
Yeah, so actually, I was just in a meeting right prior to this, and I want to see specific Oklahoma, how much the Latino community has grown in Oklahoma in the past decade. We've grown by about 33%. By far the fastest group of growth in Oklahoma. No question about it. There's not even a close second. So government and responsiveness only works if people are engaged with their government. And I think that government's done a bad job in the past of letting people know, especially minorities, Latinos specifically, that this is your government, that we want you to engage. You're welcome in this building. We want you here. We want to hear from you. And we want to hear your thoughts, your ideas. And, sadly, government is really bad at being proactive, but really good at being reactive. So make government react. Hold the people that you elect accountable. I mean, it's as simple as showing up to vote. That's great. That's step one. Be engaged, learn about the process. But I know me as a legislator, I am begging for feedback from people. Like, and I get it. Everyone's busy and life is tough and there's a lot going on. You're trying to make a living. But if there was just a snippet of information, if a constituent calls me and says, hey, this really matters to me, X, Y, Z, I'll jump up and down to everything I can to try to get it done. So I think that's the point is with this massive number of us and we're growing and we have a lot of the same values and, all these things, let's organize and let's demand better. And I think that's so important to forget. And I think that's simple, but it's simple to say and simple to think conceptually, but actually doing it is hard. Because we're in a busy world, right? And it's harder to make a buck now and it's harder to make a living, but maybe stopping and remembering that community. And if we all, there's power in numbers and it's clear that our numbers matter and that we can hold people accountable that way. So I think that's super important and just being engaged in the community. It's super easy to be frustrated with this process and to want to just separate from it. Believe me, I'm here, I work in this Capitol building and I'm elected and there are days I want to separate from it. Just because it's frustrating, but we can't. Decisions are made by those that show up, and we just got to make sure we keep showing up and make sure that everyone knows that we're here and we're here to stay and we're not going anywhere. So I think that's the first step.
Absolutely. I always say that when it comes to the Latino community, if we leave Latinos behind, we will leave our country behind.
That's
because
right.
Actually, when the number, I hope that they break it down to where people fully understand that a lot of the growth Latino community, or most of the growth, has been due to birth rates, not due to immigrants.
That's right.
So it is very important that these are U.S.-born citizens, right?
Yep.
And some of them are born in mixed status families. So we really do have to ensure that we focus and pay attention to the Latino community and ensure that the Latino community is given the opportunities and the resources that we need in order for us to be productive citizens, in order for us to contribute to our nation, continuing to be successful in every area for that matter. But, since you mentioned your constituents, I want to ask you a question that will hopefully, allow the audience to get to know you a little bit more, and then we can go back to the digital divide subject. So tell us a little bit about an obstacle that you faced in your early life or in your professional career and that you were able to overcome, and how you did that.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So I'm obviously in the Oklahoma legislature. I'm not an Oklahoman originally. I was born just on the north side of Denver. My family's been in that area for a very long time. Actually, that's where my family originally immigrated from Michoacan, Mexico, where my family is originally from. Ended up kind of on the north side of Denver, working in the coal mines and working on farms and all those types of things. I do think it's pretty interesting, the area that I grew up in. The farm is still there, that my grandma and her parents lived on, working there as migrant workers, and living in kind of that one-room shack, no running water, no electricity. So that was kind of in the background of my life, right? Still seeing that system that existed in what brought my family to this country. But also, I think one of the biggest obstacles where I came from is, there's this divide that is talked about a lot, and I hope that we continue to work on, is just that simple education divide. I was born in an area that's impoverished. I mean, poverty was rampant. The opportunity to go to college was just almost a foreign concept. I didn't really know anybody that went to college. We moved a lot because we didn't own anything. I mean, I was just trying to find a stable place to live. So in the background of this, I'm supposed to be educated in a system that honestly doesn't really understand me or my family. Probably failed my parents, in all honesty. I did get an opportunity through scholarships and parents taking on third jobs and stuff like that. I got to go to a small private school. My parents realized the opportunity pretty quick that it wasn't working for me in that failing public school. And if I'd stayed there, it just wasn't going to work out. So it's hard for me because I got a lot of opportunities through having this very specialized education that a lot of people around me didn't get to have. I'll never forget when my 8th grade teacher, very sweet lady, started talking to me about college. And I was like, I'm not going to college. People like me don't go to college. I'll do what my dad does. My dad's an electrician, great jobs, made a great career, the hardest working person I ever met. But that's what I was going to do. That's people like me don't go to college. I can't afford that. I don't know what that looks like. So I think that moment when I realized, like, okay, stop, I can go to college. This could be an opportunity for me. Like, I'm not an idiot. Maybe my parents didn't get this opportunity, but I can figure this out. There are ways to do this. I think that was like that light bulb moment for me, is that, I could be the first generation of my family that kind of changes that path. And I'm glad that we've talked a lot about community via broadband, but it truly is that community. And this is there's a billion things that's great about being Latino, but to me, it's like I was raised by an army of people, and they're not all necessarily, in my bloodline, but you better believe that I have people all over town that remember me and that helped raise me. And my wife always teases me. She's like, every time we go to town, how many aunts and cousins do you have? I said, well, technically they're not, but I mean, you better believe if I acted up in public and one of my tias saw me, I was getting whooped, right? Like, it was a community. And I think that's so powerful. And so I think that although it was poor and it looked like statistically, like it was going to be tough to get out of there, I was able to come to that through family, community, and just working hard and having somebody tell me like, hey, you can do it. People are going to try to put you in a box. They're going to try to tell you can't do this, you can't do that. Don't listen to them. Go for it. You can do it. And I've been pretty blessed and pretty fortunate to make it work. So.
Wonderful, and I'm sure you work very hard. And speaking of Michoacan, my family is also from Michoacan. I'm from Michoacan, so
really?
I fully your background when you mentioned, the fact that you thought college is not for me. No one in my family has ever done it. That was exactly what I thought as well. I'm also a first-generation college student, and I fully understand what you felt, because I felt the exact same thing. And unfortunately, we're not alone. There's a lot of people that feel that way. And in fact, there's a lot of our students now that feel that they cannot get a job in a technology company, for example, because they don't see it as something attainable, right? If you go back to my community where I grew up in Washington State, a very small town in central Washington. And if you go back to, if I speak to people in my community, if I ask students that went to my high school or my middle school if they can get a job at, Disney or any of these companies, they would say, no, I can't. It's not for me. For many reasons, for the same barriers that we had in our mind, right? And some of those barriers are real, some of those are perceived, but it makes a difference, and we have to fix that, right? And that's the case when it comes to to technology. I feel that if I ask a lot of those young folks that are in my community, if I ask them if they if they want to go to college, they would again say no, it's not for me. But if I explain to them that they can go to college, for example, and create a video game, a lot of the young boys especially would be very excited to, right? So it's very, very important that people in our community understand that, yes, college is for them, that, yes, they should get into the STEM field because they matter, they're very important. Every company in one way or another has to become a technology company or has become. So it's very important that our students, go into the STEM field. But yes, unfortunately, I feel like we would get a response, like the responses that you and I had in our minds, whether they were real or not. But yeah, so that's unfortunate, but it's wonderful to see stories like yours. And I'm very glad that you are serving your district now, and hopefully you will make an impact in the lives of those young people that may still feel the same way you felt growing up. But let's go back to that, right, to the digital divide. And because we are in the sort of disaster hurricane season, let me ask you the following question. We obviously have seen a lot of natural disaster, and they have devastated, various regions of our country. How important is broadband access to first responders?
I mean, I think it's interesting you bring up hurricane season because we're right in the thick of it and we're reading about it and seeing the videos and everything every day. Well, here in Oklahoma, we don't get hurricanes, but we get tornadoes. And I'll tell you, I have lived through and been I've seen the horrific damage that a tornado can cause to the community. I mean, literally ripping a house off of its foundation and never seeing the scrap of that wood again, things like that. But that is the lifeblood of the response. I mean, not only to the immediate response, whether it's search and rescue, trying to figure out where people are, that is obviously the first step, but rebuilding these communities, that is one of the first most valuable things that could happen. I know we had a massive tornado in Moore. It's been a few years back. I was there, and literally the next day, first of all, there were, the Red Cross was there offering the basic necessities of life, water, food, things like that. But right behind the Red Cross truck was an AT&T truck, setting up a network to make sure that people have ways to contact their family members. I mean, think about it. I get it all the time. All my family's in Denver still. They see a tornado in Oklahoma, they assume my house is gone, right? So I have everybody that I've ever met trying to call me, get a hold of me, make sure I'm okay. But just the ability to communicate that to family. But this day and age, you have people coming in from across the country and from the world helping with disaster cleanup. The only way to connect those different services are through technology, through helping people know which part of the community's been helped and which part's been searched, where they found people, things like that. And that's really the only way to connect everybody. And like I said, I was amazed at where people were coming from to help here. I mean, we're talking different countries and fire and rescue from different places that you're like, wow, I had no idea. But the only way that they communicate with each other is via a network that could connect them through cell phones or being able to chat back and forth with each other to really coordinate efforts, because it's a big undertaking to rescue hundreds of people. In this case, with this tornado, it went over a couple schools. So getting kids out of the school building, making sure they're safe, but then also the rebuilding process, it's taken years, and having people connected into that has been interesting.
Absolutely.
Rosa, let me chime in here because I want to thank Representative Martinez for bringing that up. We may have on the call folks that are from that team, from that disaster recovery team, and I know how committed that team is to be driving in the opposite direction, right? How unnerving that is to be driving in the opposite direction of the evacuation. I mean, it's one of those things that just, I'm so proud of the work that my colleagues do day in and day out. And now they're in full force, doing recovery efforts on the coast. the recovery efforts on, in California fires have never stopped. And, thank you for bringing that up, because I want to acknowledge the work that they do to ensure that, yourself, the first responders, everybody can be in communications with each other through the most stressful times of this time. So it was funny because you were speaking and I was kind of saying in my head, I was like, oh my God, he's going to say that we're right behind the Red Cross and we're right behind FEMA in a lot of time.
Yeah.
And we coordinate with them to ensure that we support those efforts as well. But I just wanted to intercede and say thank you for bringing that up. Rosa, back to you.
Absolutely. Yes, Celeste. I'm with you. Definitely thank you, AT&T, companies like AT&T and all other internet service providers for really stepping up, not only during these natural disasters, but also during the pandemic. I mean, these companies have really, really done an amazing job of keeping all of us connected, because suddenly, hundreds and, of people that were not working from home, were not using the internet, are now connected, right? And it seemed like it was just, an easy thing, but these companies have really worked hard to ensure that these connections work, to ensure that all of us are able to use these connections and to ensure that all of us have service. So definitely a big shout out to AT&T and the companies that have, ensure that we are connected during the time of need, especially during this pandemic. But anyway, so back to the questions, Representative Martinez, thank you for sharing that. Yes, that is very important. And now, how can disadvantaged communities best work with elected officials such as yourself to make sure that the broadband connectivity issues are prioritized?
Yeah, so I think we touched on it a little bit about having the willingness to communicate. It's really hard for elected officials. I think people assume a lot of times, like, hey, you get elected, you're an expert in everything, you know everything that we need, right? And I wish that were the case. Heck, you could ask my parents. I wish I was elected when I was 16 because I did know everything at that age. But, unfortunately, I don't anymore. So honestly, we're only able to deal with the issues that are brought to the forefront of our minds. So communicating that. And I think that that's hard. Once again, I get that. I'll tell you something we're doing here that I'm super proud of that I think is helping a lot is for the very first time in Oklahoma history, we've actually started a Latino caucus. There's enough of us to do it. There's 4 of us. Before the caucus was pretty easy. It was me and one other guy. And we got to, but we're growing, right? It's bipartisan. It's bicameral. Some are senators, some are House members. But it's really starting to bring some of these issues to the forefront to our colleagues. I think our colleagues want to help, but if they're not made aware of the specific issues, it's really hard to help and realize that there's a problem. So I think that's step number 1, the willingness to realize, like, hey, this is a real issue that we need to talk about. So and not only that it permeates all districts. I don't care which area of the state you represent. There are people that are affected by this. There are Latinos that are affected by this. I had one colleague that's from a very rural area here in Oklahoma, and they would assume that kind of in their region or whatever, there's probably not a huge Latino community. Wrong. There's a massive Latino community. They're out there working, and there's a couple big plants and farming and all that stuff, and there's historically groups there. So I just think making people aware that this is an issue is the toughest job, but I really do think that people want to help and help kind of solve some of these issues when we tell them. And so, you know what? Sometimes I understand that it might not be the people that are having the problems themselves, but it's nonprofits, it's people like me and you that might have the connections or the ability to keep raising awareness to the issue. I get it if you're a farm worker in Southwest Oklahoma, probably dealing with like some of the broadband connectivity issues, probably not at the top of your priority list or something that's crossing your mind on a daily basis. But people like us, that is something that we could talk about. Keep bringing awareness and realizing how big of a problem it is, and really what being disconnected does to a person and to a culture, I think, is something that we need to keep talking about and realizing that this is the world we live in. If you want to be connected to this community in every facet of life, broadband is probably the most important thing that you need.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And do you feel that the Latino community is at an advantage when it comes to broadband access, or have you seen this in underserved communities in general in Oklahoma?
Yeah, so I do think that there are definitely pockets of it, and like I said, I think it comes back to this idea of kids might get it at school a little bit, but you and I both know that most of the education a kid's going to get is not going to be in the classroom. I mean, that's a starting point, but it's going to happen at home. It's going to happen at church. It's going to happen at wherever they are in their community. So if that's not reinforced at home, I think it becomes really hard. So there's even this big divide of Latino kids that are in school with their maybe Caucasian counterparts, where that kid might go home and they're at home and they have a computer at home. Maybe mom and dad work for a tech or something, where that's really accessible to them. You start to see that divide because that education continues at home. And that's even pre-pandemic. Like you said before, given the situation we're in, where you're not going into a school building every day and your only access point would be maybe a school provided iPad, or if you're lucky, but an opportunity to connect to school via the internet. I can't imagine being in an area where the connectivity issues are so bad and you're probably already in an impoverished area, which statistics show that you might already be a few grades behind in reading, math, and then you add this whole pandemic situation. It's really creating this nightmare scenario where you have kids that, what scares me, I've seen them, heck, I was almost one of them. You get a couple grade points behind, you just figure it's hopeless and you give up. You disengage from that community. You say, it's never going to work. This isn't going to work for me. So either you drop out, heck, maybe you stay in school, but you're kind of brushed aside and you're just pushed along to kind of get you through. You do the bare minimum, you get out, and you realize you get in a workforce that you can't even participate in because you don't have the necessary skills. And that's what worries me about this current situation. And that all goes back from a disconnection. And heck, it starts from the time we're little kids, right? If you don't learn how to read well, you'll start falling behind really quick. So I think that's the biggest issue right there, is kind of trying to bridge that gap a little bit.
Yes. The current acting chairwoman of the FCC usually tells a story about how, there are students in small communities and farming communities, and those communities, happen to be Latino, many of these, oftentimes. And she talks about how there's a lot of young folks that have to go to the, McDonald's parking lot, or, a parking lot where Wi-Fi in order for them to be able to use their homework. Have you seen that in Oklahoma, in your community, in your district?
Yeah, hey, there's no doubt about it that you try to, maybe if you're lucky, the public library is open, there's a way to get in there. Nowadays, like you said, if there's a McDonald's nearby, but let's face it, I mean, that's a hardship. And when you're, I think I could relate to the 14, 15-year-old kids that I know myself. If I got to go through that much trouble to get my homework done, and eventually it's just not going to happen. And not only that, let's say you actually do show up to the McDonald's and that's not conducive to learning. I mean, you're not going to sit there and really have a educational experience. So that's the other thing to me, is like, yeah, there might be ways to get around it and really struggle to do it, but eventually it becomes such a hardship where it's just like, how does this make sense? I mean, and you give up and you find something else to do. So I do think that I realize that infrastructure is expensive to build out, and some of those complications. I do think that maybe trying to create hubs, in some of these areas where, okay, so maybe it's not a McDonald's, but there's a community center or some place where a kid could go to feel safe and feel like they could really learn there, and there's like kind of a learning environment. They have internet. Maybe that's step number one. That's not the end goal, but maybe just in the meantime to kind of hold it over. I remember when growing up, a community center played a pretty big role in my life. I could go there and there were kids my age that were around there, and there were some responsible adults to, help us make sure we're on task, working on our homework, doing things like that. I think that plays such a big role, especially this day and age when we see community dying for a lot of reasons. But in the post-pandemic world, it worries me. It worries me about people being disconnected technologically, but also emotionally, mentally, and just not knowing neighbors and really being tied into something bigger than themselves. And I think that's the threat, and that's what scares me about it the most.
Absolutely. A connection is extremely important for everything. And I think that's one of the main that we have learned with this, right? That we cannot, bear strides, not succeed if we don't have a connection. So talk to us about how you have advocated to ensure that Oklahoma kids are not left behind.
Yeah. So that's a good question. So we actually, this past legislative session, funded and created the probably the most expansive funding mechanism to build out broadband in underserved areas. It's going to be it's going to be a decade-long process, let's face it, but we've started creating the first steps, and what I've realized in government, it's that first hurdle, right? So if you can make it normal for us to put dollars towards something, it's a little easier the next time, because we've already done it once. There will be some success stories, and there's no doubt in my mind in this case, there'll be a lot of success stories of saying, hey, this area has better connectivity, educational outcomes have gotten better, all these wonderful things. So we've jumped over that hardest hurdle, in my opinion. Now, we can't relax and say, okay, our job's done. But I do think we don't have to tread new ground every year. We're going to say, okay, we put these dollars here. This is what we built out. We've actually targeted it to some of the most underserved. So they're kind of starting with rural communities. And I brought that up because historically, yeah, that is probably the hardest areas to get internet access. There has to be a component. And I think step number 2 for me anyway, is having that conversation about the literacy issues and things like that, where people might have the infrastructure. That doesn't mean they have the ability to utilize that infrastructure. And that's going to be a component that we must continue as we move on.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that. I think when we were having technical issues, I tried to mention that when the conversations were happening on the Hill on the infrastructure bill, Allvanza was very involved in those conversations, and we ensured that we educated the members that were working on that bill about the importance of having an educational component, right, an adoption component, because that's absolutely the case. You gave the example of your grandparents. I always give the example of my parents, especially because my parents are very. So, sometimes people assume that it's only people, elders, right? Elderly people that don't have the access. It's like, no, we're talking about people that are very young, the skills, and they don't, for whatever reason, right? There's a billion reasons why they don't, a lot of barriers. But it is very important that we address that component, the adoption component, because a connection is not enough. It's absolutely not enough if we don't have the skills, right? And if our information is not protected, for example, when we go online as well. I think the Latino community has often been the victim of scams, right? And that's part of the reason why they don't trust going online, because they don't trust, adding their information, because they don't know who's going to use it and how they're going to use this. So there are a lot of things that we need to do to ensure that people trust going online and that they're able to navigate the online world in a safely and effective way. And that's one of the main things that we try to do is educate our community about, what the things that they can do to ensure that they understand the importance of being online. And speaking of that, I'm happy when I see a lot of young Latinas and Latinos online, but I'm also at the same time concerned because it is the fact that a lot of the young folks, not just Latinos, but many Latinos, when they use the internet, they have access to the internet, but they are using the internet to go on social media, for example, right? To post a video, a picture on Instagram. And nothing against social media platforms, but it is important that our young community, our young folks, understand how important it is to not only be consumers of technology, but also producers, right? It's very important that young people go into the STEM fields, and I don't think we're seeing that in our schools, right? I don't think Latinos fully understand the importance of the STEM education. I don't think they fully understand the many opportunities that the tech, industry offers. And it's very important that we get these students the information that they need in order for them to make the right decision when it comes to, going into these fields. Are there any programs in your district, or are you working on any initiatives that can help those students understand the importance of a STEM education, and the importance of them being involved with technology, but again, not just as consumers, but also as producers?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is actually something that I've been working on. There's a pretty large Hispanic Chamber of Commerce here in Oklahoma City area, and I know there's been some work there. But there's also, like I mentioned, the Latino Caucus. One of the initiatives that really been trying to work on here is taking people that have made it in that field. So say I'm a computer programmer and I'm Ryan Martinez, just go meet some of these kids, right? Like if you can envision like, hey, if Ryan Martinez can do it, why can't I? And get them excited at a really young age, because let's face it, I mean, when you're a young person, if I'm like, hey, we really think you should become an engineer, it's going to be a lot of trigonometry. That's not exciting, right? But let's talk about building a bridge, like take somebody out to designing a bridge, to doing some of the fun stuff to get people excited. It's pretty amazing. And I have seen it a couple times. We had the opportunity to bring out a group of engineers, and it was funny because they were more nervous than the kids, right? The engineers were kind of like, I don't know, like they probably don't want to hear from me. And it's like, well, let's just talk about kind of the neat stuff about your job. Like tell them, one of them had designed a water tower in Edmond, the town that I live in. And, that's something that these kids see every day. And something that's kind of neat. So we actually got to take some kids out to the water tower, show them and talk about some of that. And I remember seeing the looks on some of the kids' faces that like, why can't I do this? Like, this is kind of cool, right? Like the science behind building a water tower, like this is something I should do. It's something that's neat. So I think making those connections with successful people that have already kind of been down that road. But I do think it is incumbent upon us to remind other Latinos and Latinas that have been successful to give back to their community by just offering themselves, by saying, hey, I was you once, I get it. I know there probably aren't maybe engineers coming left and right into your community. There aren't scientists, but those that do it, go talk to those kids, get them excited, make them imagine them being able to do that job. Because I think that's half of it. I mean, at a young age, you kind of start thinking about what you want to be and what that looks like, and you're most influenced by the people around you. I know for me, as a young kid, first time I ever got interested in politics was I met the mayor of our town when I was like 9 years old. I thought that was awesome. All the kids around me were like, this is really weird. Like, this guy's boring. Like, let's talk to the kid's dad who's a firefighter, right? But I was that one weird kid in the front of the room that was just like, I love this. This is so cool. And, that mayor said, hey, why don't you come help out on my next campaign? As much as a little kid can help. But that was the spark, right? That I realized, like, this is something I'm interested in. And I think that goes for science. And there are so many neat things to get kids excited in realizing that not only is it an important part of the economy, but it's something they have the ability to do and something that they could really enjoy doing on top of it. So I think that's it. Just showing like, hey, you can do this. And that wasn't really much different from you, like to dream big and to keep striving to do better. So.
Absolutely. I think that good old saying of you cannot be what you cannot see is very, very much accurate, right? And it's also very, very important that, like you said, that the people in the Latino community that have made it, right, that are role models, they should reach back, right, and help other young folks the need to see people that look like them in successful careers. And it's also important, obviously, that these companies hire diverse talent in order for those people to have, that opportunity to be role models. But that's another conversation for another day. I think we're running out of time. Celeste, do you want to move forward with Q&A, or do you want me to ask another question?
No, so actually, let's just candidly, I had some comments. I mean, I think the most touching thing that was just said was that, like that role model, the role that role models play in the future of the next generation. And we could have a better audience right now because these are the most committed employees. These are the ones that volunteer their time in their communities. These are the folks, the employees resource the employee groups are in place for this very reason. But we usually do our end understanding the impact. But I appreciate Representative Martinez's view in which he says, I was impacted by somebody that, kind of said, hey, come on down and I'll give you some flyers that you could give, around the crowd or whatever it may be. It's about inspiring. It's about taking the time to tell another kid you can do it, because I think what I have heard is we never know a person's situation, right? We don't know, what they don't know, what they're exposed to. And then all of a sudden you just take one moment to say, let me tell you why I'm passionate about math. Let me tell you why I'm passionate about medicine. Let me tell you why I'm passionate about landscaping. It doesn't matter what it is that you are passionate about. This kid may never have been exposed to that passion, but then for that moment, they see their future, in front of them, and the doors open and the path opens, and now they can see an opportunity for them. And so I thank you both for kind of like bringing it all together as to, and we landed squarely without intending to, but we landed squarely exactly at this intersection of, the role that ERGs play in helping the community, the role that, civil servants play in helping the communities, the nonprofit sector plays. And I think it really goes back to Representative Martinez's point on the community, right? It's a village. It takes a village to make this happen. It takes all of us together, coordinating efforts and working, and educating each other. And this is how we bring it all into fruition and into a successful community. So with that, I want to thank you, Rosa, for, bearing through all of these technical issues. I apologize that you had to go through that. Hopefully, you're feeling fine about it, and you had a great conversation. Representative Martinez, you are funny, you are inspiring. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to have this conversation with us. I think we can take that call of action, call to action to continue to get involved in our communities, to call our elected officials and share our thoughts and our commitment to elevate all communities. Any last thoughts before we wrap it up?
I just want to say, go ahead, Rosa.
I just want to say thank you, Representative Martinez. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your willingness to share your thoughts with us today. Connecting all communities is not an easy task, as I mentioned at the beginning. It's going to take all of us doing our part to ensure that we connect every community, every resident, every person in the U.S. Because if we want to continue being the leader in innovation, we have to make sure everyone is connected and is able to take advantage of the many resources available online. So thank you again for your time. Thank you, AT&T, for sponsoring this conversation, and thank you, HACEMOS, for convening us today.
Yeah, I just want to say the same. Thank you very much, and just anybody on the call, if I can ever be helpful with anything, I truly mean it. Don't ever hesitate to contact me or my office, or if you want to continue the conversation, ask anybody that knows me. I don't shut up, so I'll keep talking to everybody. So I'm just excited to be part of the conversation, and let me know any good ideas or any ideas, and we could talk about them. So I appreciate it again, and thanks for making the connection.
Our pleasure. Thank you all for joining us. We look forward to our next conversation. Have a great day.
Okay, have a good day.